right now there are a lot of people who really strongly believe that, that there are just not enough resources. And that the human race needs to stop expanding, that we just, human beings have too much stuff, and growth is no longer sustainable. Growth is bad. And if you look at the way these people frame their arguments, there are some fundamental flaws in what they are saying. For example, there's a book that was published by the Club of Rome. It was published in the 1970s, and it was called The Limits to Growth. And they basically argued that the human population is too big, that economic growth cannot continue, and that we would run out of oil in the 1990s at some point. And here's the thing. If we were currently extracting and producing oil the same way that we extracted and produced oil when that book was published, they would be correct, right? If we were getting oil the same way we got it in the 70s, we would have run out by now, except we didn't. Deep sea drilling has expanded, hydraulic fracking has expanded, and we have not run out. We have not run out. We have not run out of oil. Now, I think that oil is a very inefficient mode, and I think we need to get off of fossil fuels. But what that book failed to take into account was human innovation. At the time that book was published, there were minerals that were completely and utterly worthless. But now, these minerals are very, very valuable. Why? They're used in computer chips. Folks, human beings are constantly changing the way they interact with their resources. What would a caveman have done with oil? Right? You've probably seen the old TV show, The Beverly Hillbillies. You ever see The Beverly Hillbillies? Let me tell you all a story about a boy named Jed. And it's like, black gold Texas tea, right? His hunting rifle, he discovers oil. Right? And of course he shouts, "I'm rich, I've got oil." What if Joe the caveman, living 9,000 years ago, had discovered oil? He'd been out hunting with his pointed stick, and he discovered oil. He would have said, "That's completely worthless." It would have had no value to him whatsoever. In fact, if Joe the caveman had discovered a whole bunch of gold, he probably would have thought it was very nice to look at. It was shiny, but it wouldn't have done much good for Joe the caveman. The reason that gold has value, the reason that oil has value, is because the way we interact with our environment as human beings has changed. The entire history of the human race is changing the way we interact with resources. If human beings stop changing the way they interact with resources, we're screwed. If we don't change the way we interact with fossil fuels right now, we're screwed. Look at the environment right now. We have to get off of fossil fuels. They're right when they say that climate change is affected by human behavior. They're right when they say that oil-based economy is not sustainable. They are absolutely right. Absolutely right. What they're wrong about is when they lack imagination. When it doesn't occur to them that just like oil was worthless to Joe the caveman, there are things in our world now that seem worthless that we could figure out as human beings how to use them. Furthermore, we've sent probes to Mars. We've sent satellites into outer space. China is already extracting helium-3 from the moon for their research on fusion energy. Did you know that? Helium-3, an element that is very rare on the Earth, is very abundant on the far side of the moon. And China has already sent their lunar spacecraft to extract helium-3 from the moon. Imagine if we could start mining asteroids. The New York Times had an article about this. Imagine if every time an asteroid passed the Earth, we managed to send up a probe that went to that asteroid and took very valuable resources off that asteroid. Think about it. Asteroids pass the Earth all the time. And if every time one of those asteroids passed the Earth, we sent up a probe or a satellite that went on to the asteroid, extracted some resources, and brought it back to the planet, that would be great. Think about it. Think about it. Who's to say we can't start extracting resources from Mars? Who's to say we can't extract resources from other parts of the galaxy? Human beings are relentlessly creative. They are constantly changing the way they interact with the environment. If there's one thing about human beings that for the last 7,000 to 8,000 years, we have been changing the way we interact with our environment. We are the only animal that has the ability to make the environment serve us. Every other species interacts with their environment in a more or less neutral way. But humanity is not an animal. Beavers have been building their dams the same way for millions of years. Ants have been building their ant colonies the same way for millions of years. But in just less than 10,000 years, human beings have gone from hunter-gatherer tribes living in caves to space travel, iPhones, high-speed railway. I believe in humanity. The human race has the ability to advance. And if you stop believing in humanity, at that point, I can understand why people are turning to drug addiction. I can understand why people are getting suicidal. If you believe that humanity can't advance and that we must stop advancing, I can understand why you're in a state of pessimism and hopelessness. The people who think humanity can't advance have names like Rockefeller and DuPont and Carnegie. And you know why they think humanity can't advance? Because they're at the top of the mountain. Global capitalism is like that game that kids play, King of the Mountain. You ever see King of the Mountain? Those kids are trying to get to the top of the mountain. What has happened is that Rockefeller and Carnegie and DuPont and Rothschild and Vanderbilt and Mellon have gotten to the top of the mountain. They've wrestled their way to the top of the mountain. They've killed a lot of people to get to the top of the mountain. They have ruthlessly gotten to the top of the mountain. And now that they're at the top of the mountain, they are declaring, game over. Nope, we got to stop playing. We got to stop playing the game now. We're at the top of the mountain. The game's over. Now, it's been fun, folks. I had a great time, but we won the game. Game over. We're at the top of the mountain. That is exactly what they're doing. They're at the top of the mountain, and so now they're saying, well, for the sake of the environment, for the sake of Mother Earth, game over, guys. It was fun, wasn't it? Great, great. And of course, that's why the fracking companies deny global warming, because they want to be at the top of the mountain. Right? That's why a lot of these low-level capitalists, My Pillow, Mark Lindell, that's why they deny global warming. That's why they are so full of anger right now, is that they're competing with Mellon and Carnegie and DuPont. And they want to get to the top of the mountain. Well, I'm here to say that yes, we have some big problems. But the answer is not to end human progress. The answer is not to end human history. In fact, it's the opposite. The answer is to go further ahead. The answer is to get beyond fossil fuels. The answer is to get beyond the fuel sources that are destroying our environment. The answer is to find other sources of energy. The answer is to find other sources of resources. The answer is progress. The answer is progress. The answer is progress. And obviously we are in a crisis. We are definitely in a crisis. But the way out is forward, not backward. You know? I'm trying to think of a good analogy. But there are many analogies I could make, but ultimately, the answer is progress. The answer is human progress. Human beings are quite an amazing species. We are quite an amazing species. And we will continue to advance. And trying to stop human beings from advancing is a pretty failed mission. In fact, rather than thinking of an analogy, here's a tangent I'll go on. It actually ties into the next super chat. Myths that communism is anti-religion. We'll get to that, but actually, why don't I point you all toward a very common legend, the story of Adam and Eve. Right? The creation story that is popular in religion. It actually fits in quite well with everything I just said about human progress. Right? We know the story that there was this garden, this magical garden, in which human beings had everything they needed. They had everything they needed, but they were told that there was a certain tree, and that tree was the tree of knowledge. And they could not eat from that tree, for if they ate from that tree, they would die. But the story goes, the snake showed up and convinced Eve to eat from the tree. She liked it. She ate from the tree. She went over to Adam, convinced him to eat from the tree. And they ate from the tree, and they were then cast out of the garden. And when they were cast out of the garden, the story goes, suddenly they had to grow their own food. And that story is actually a very good analogy for the birth of human civilization. When we were hunters and gatherers, everything was there for us. We killed animals. The animals, we killed them. We had fruits and things to eat. We didn't have to grow our own food. But then at some point, thousands of years ago, human beings acquired knowledge. Something changed in our brains. We went from being animals to being humans. We somehow acquired knowledge. And once we acquired knowledge, we got way too good at gathering fruits and nuts. We got way too good at killing animals. We developed spears. We figured out patterns in animal herds. I mean, we knew, and we got really good. Thank you, Teresa. We got really good, very good at hunting and gathering. So good at it that there was a scarcity of fruits and nuts. There was a scarcity of animals. And suddenly, we had to grow our own food. We acquired knowledge. And as a result of acquiring knowledge, we had to grow our own food. We were no longer able to live in the balance of the garden. The garden, we are told, everything was in balance, according to the legend. Right? Everything was in balance. Everything was in balance, right? They never ran out of fruits and nuts, never ran out of animals, human beings and animals, and everything was frozen in the garden. But it was when we acquired knowledge that we were kicked out of the garden. It's funny that this fairy tale, this fable, that it actually has some rather interesting parallels to the historical materialist understanding of human civilization. That we once lived in a world of great abundance, but somehow we acquired knowledge, we acquired the ability to be progressive, we acquired the ability to advance. And once we acquired this ability to advance, suddenly we were cast out of perfectly being in balance with nature. And the legend continues that, according to the Christian narrative, after thousands of years and struggling with good and evil, eventually Eden is restored. That is the Christian narrative, right? That after thousands of years of struggling with good and evil, there will be a gigantic battle against some kind of empire that rules the entire world. And afterwards, Eden will be restored, and that state of plentiful abundance will be restored. Well, Marxism has the exact same narrative. It argues that, yes, class society came out of the society of great abundance, and we continue to advance, and through the class struggle, eventually we will get back to that state of abundance, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their need. We will get back to that state of no longer being in economic want. We will be back into the balance that we were in at the beginning. The historical materialist narrative and the Christian narrative are actually quite similar to each other. But if you look at the legends and myths about many societies in history, there are many, many similar stories. You look at the Greek mythology, you look at Roman mythology. Yes, the characters are different. Yes, the messages are different. But ultimately, this narrative that humans were in a state of perfection, gained their knowledge, and had a fall from grace, and then we will go through thousands of years of trials and tribulations and some kind of world empire coming into existence, and that empire falling in some kind of epic battle. And then we will once again be restored to that state of prosperity. That is the narrative of human history that you will find in almost every society. It's actually interesting. What Karl Marx helped us to understand about the history of the human economy and the history of the means of production and economics and civilization and class society is something that all human beings throughout all history have kind of known in their bones. It is a narrative that is very, very much deeply embedded into the human psyche. We human beings seem very, very aware of this narrative. And what's interesting is there's an odd parallel in this narrative to human life. When a baby is born, it can't feed itself, can't take care of itself. It desperately depends on other people. But gradually, the baby becomes more and more independent. And eventually, it becomes an adult and is kicked out of its parents' household, has to go out on its own. But eventually, the human being becomes older and can't take care of themselves and depends on other people once again. And once again, and that you can make a parallel to the life of a human being. This narrative that Marx gives us about human history, going from primitive communism to class society, back once again to the higher stage of communism. That Christianity gives us the Garden of Eden, the fall of man, and human civilization, ultimately leading up to the Battle of Armageddon, and then the restoration of Eden, heaven on earth. Also humans, the baby, dependent on others, not able to survive on its own, growing into adulthood, becoming self-sufficient, and then eventually getting old and deteriorating to the point that they depend on others, and then eventually dying. Right? This is a narrative that seems well embedded in the human psyche. It's very interesting. It's very interesting that this understanding of where human beings came from before human civilization existed, which was the majority of human existence, was pre-civilization. Something happening, and then we acquire the ability to build a civilization, to have technology. And that creates new levels of productivity and new expansions of the life expectancy, but all kinds of new problems and contradictions. And those contradictions proceed and escalate and get bigger and get more dramatic. And human beings become more connected with each other than ever before. Nations emerge, a global economy emerges. And then finally, the contradictions that emerge because of our human progress get so dramatic and big that they finally get resolved. And then once again, we're back to a state of prosperity and abundance. It's an interesting way of looking at things. Thank you for letting me go down that rabbit hole with you all. I enjoy talking about these kinds of things. You would think that mythology and dialectical and historical materialism would have nothing in common. But actually, they do. There are similarities in the narrative.